Hello and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Ken Wei. On today's program, no claiming of the choppy seas. The interception of a U.S. spy plane by Chinese fighter jets is just the latest controversy in the South China Sea. We take a step back and look at the bigger picture of all factors behind the tensions in the region. And taking care of the people, Nigerian Babatunde Osotime, head of the United Nations Population Fund, speaks about improving reproductive health in Africa. We also discuss the challenges facing China as it deals with its biggest population in the world. And we begin today's show with the South China Sea issue. This week, a U.S. spy plane conducting activities over the South China Sea was monitored by the Chinese jets. The U.S. has again defended its innocence by stressing the spy plane was flying in international space. However, this was contradicted by the Chinese side, who said it was an extremely close surveillance. What can the U.S. achieve from their upgraded actions over China's sovereignty? And also we will discuss about that. But before that, let's take a look at this.
Tensions escalate further. On Tuesday, a U.S. Navy EP-3 spy plane conducted close-in spying activities near China's Hainan Island in the South China Sea. As a warning, two Chinese J-11 fighter jets followed it to monitor the U.S. plane. But the U.S. Defense Department criticized such action as an unsafe intercept.
Two Chinese aircraft that approached, and our aircrew felt that the approach was not conducted in the safe and professional manner, and so that's the concern that we have, and that's what's being reviewed at this time.
On Thursday, China's foreign ministry denied this statement and reaffirmed all its actions have been conducted under the law.
We received information from the department concerned, and what the U.S. side has said is untrue. Two Chinese military airplanes followed and monitored it in accordance with laws and regulations, and also all maintained safe distance from it. China's relevant operations subscribe to professional and security standards.
Such spying flights have led to serious clashes and sunk two-way ties before. In 2001, a collision between a Chinese jet and a U.S. spy plane in the South China Sea caused the death of a Chinese pilot. In recent years, the South China Sea has turned into a hotspot for potential regional conflicts. Nonetheless, the parties tried efforts to establish certain mechanisms to prevent a crisis. In 2014, China and the U.S. signed the Rules of Behavior for the Safety of Air and Maritime Encounters as a big step to reduce conflicts. However, U.S. military warplanes and aircraft have conducted more close-in reconnaissance, frequently over the South China Sea. This has caused heightening of the uncertain situation. With an international arbitration launched unilaterally by the Philippines against China's territorial sovereignty expected within weeks, questions over the South China Sea issue continue to hang in midair.
For more on the South China Sea disputes and the recent interactions between the U.S. and the Chinese side, we are joined here in the Beijing studio by Professor Xu Hui from the Chinese Defense University of China. Welcome, Professor. Meanwhile, in Beijing, we're having Mr. Teng Jianchun, Director for the Center of Arms Control with the China Institute of International Studies. Welcome as well, sir. And in Washington, D.C., we are joined by Mr. Kurt Volker, former U.S. Ambassador to NATO and now CEO of McCain Institute for International Leadership. Welcome as well, Ambassador Volker. Ambassador Volker, I would like to begin with you. Is it provocation, as the Chinese believes, what U.S. just did over the South China Sea?
No, I don't think so. I do think it is a serious incident where both sides need to be talking with each other. We obviously have different points of view about sovereignty issues. China claims sovereignty over parts of this sea that the U.S. does not recognize, nor do other countries in the region recognize. The U.S. takes no position, but we know it's a disputed area instead. And we both operate military aircraft and military forces in the area. We also agree on wanting to keep our forces from coming into contact with one another. We're not trying to provoke incidents from either side. And I do think it's important that we communicate about that to try to maintain as much peace and stability as possible.
we communicate, how much can we communicate? How much of those communications will be able to avoid possible clash or conflict
Well,
on
yes.
the site?
Yeah, I think it has been done in the past, yes.
Very
It
briefly
has been
from you,
done in the past
Ambassador.
and can continue to be done. Yes, you frame the issues of what you agree on and what you disagree on. There will be areas of disagreement, but you try to at least manage those to avoid actual conflict.
Ambassador Xu here in Beijing, yes, we try to do that. Everybody state their opinion. It's an international practice to do that when you have conflicts. But in reality, when those two planes fly very close to one another, there's always the possibility of an accident. When accident happens, that is totally bringing the thing to another different nature. So, Professor Xu, are we playing with fire? And who is playing with fire?
I think it's really dangerous for this kind of place. Communication can play a role, and this is very important for the two sides who frequently engage in such a kind of place. But I think to the utmost, it can play a limited role in avoiding conflict between the two sides. The best bet is, I think, is try to talk and to avoid these kind of so close contact with each other. That means I think the U.S. should reduce their times to have a coastal reconnaissance to the other sovereign states. Unfortunately, the U.S. has played that kind of games during the Cold War, and they have rich experience, and they want to play the games again in this area, in China, coastal areas, and even the others.
But Professor Xu, I have to
fundamentally pose a threat to the other countries.
But I have to ask you this question, just to be fair here for the discussion. I mean, when the U.S. planes fly over, in order to make their political statements, why is it really necessary for the Chinese planes to go up there and try to intercept? Couldn't that make the things ever more dangerous?
For instance, if some guy always come to your doorsteps and try to see what happened in the inside, and you will feel quite uncomfortable. You have legitimate right to come out to say, hey, hello, keep away from our doors. So quite clear. So I think the fundamental reason for the dangers is the Americans, I said that excessive claimants of their freedom of navigation operations in the other country.
But
and that kind of freedom operations is quite consequential. To the least, it will, create hostilities and even, mistrust between the other two countries. To the worst, it will lead to the risk of war.
All right.
By the end of the Cold War, the Americans enjoyed excessive freedom operations in anywhere in the world. But what happened? What the consequence? It led to war, and a lot of American men and women were killed in the war field.
Okay.
And no need to mention about other innocent peoples. So I think all these freedom of navigation operations should have some limits.
Okay. Well, those are, of course, voices from the military. But what about from the civilian side? Mr. Tang, for you, I mean, the militaries talk about, well, there should be political discussions and negotiations and dialogues about different kinds of political attitude toward the issue. But will dialogue in this on this issue really work? I mean, it seems that all sides have very clear views about what they believe is the ultimate political correctness, and therefore can they, in a way, be putting their feet into other shoes and think about the alternatives?
Of course, political dialogue is very important to solve such a dispute. Actually, this is dispute one of the three obstacles in the relations between China and the United States. The close surveillance to the Chinese territory, and I think why we keep such a clear-cut position against these close surveillance by the United States. Actually, this reminds us of the Cold War game played by the United States with Russia, with former Soviet Union, and they did a lot of close surveillance to the border, and there were some clashes. For example, the shooting down of the Korean airplane and for the surveillance purpose.
All right.
So I think this is a very dangerous game. I quite agree with what Professor Xu just mentioned. It's a challenge to the security of our country. For example, the surveillance plane EP3, actually it can collect the commander's voice. It's very important. If a commander's voice can be heard during the wartime, which means you will be there,
All right.
and the missile will be followed your voice and kill the commander. So this is a very dangerous thing.
Let's just follow your logic a little bit and come back to Ambassador Volker in the U.S. Mr. Ambassador, is the United States, at least according to the logic of Mr. Tang here in Beijing, trying to regard China as the former Soviet Union, as the U.S. did during the Cold War?
No, I don't think so. I think that there's a great difference between China and the Soviet Union. We have an immense trading relationship with China. We have very close economic ties. We invest in each other's countries. We have strong cultural links. China is very different from the kind of totalitarian society that the Soviet Union had tried to impose. China is not aggressively threatening other countries around the world the way the Soviet Union did during the Cold War. So there's a lot where the U.S. and China have a lot in common, a lot we can work on, yet we will still have some differences. And this is what we were talking about earlier again. It's just important to recognize when we do have differences, these can be managed peacefully, and we have to be respectful of each other's needs and positions and distance. We will come in contact. If a plane came to the U.S. coast, we would send up our fighter aircraft, but there are protocols for how we do that. China has similar protocols as well, and that's the kind of thing we could be talking about to make this safer.
Can you give us some examples, Ambassador Volker, as to what kind of protocols are you referring to? Because many of our viewers from around the world, they might not necessarily know all the technical details, but at certain times,
Sure.
Technical details could be extremely important.
Yeah. I'll give you a perfect illustration here. So when a military aircraft comes close to the airspace of another country, not even in the airspace, even close, international airspace, they will have on transponders that communicate who that aircraft is, what they belong to. The country that they're approaching may send up interceptors, fighter aircraft, to intercept and escort to make sure that that does not enter the territorial space of that country. There will be communication between the pilots to say, here is who we are, here is who you are, what are your intentions, and there's also a safe distance that is maintained between the aircraft to avoid sudden moves and to avoid coming into collision. China has such protocols as well. But I'll give you the example of Russia and its behavior in the Baltic Sea, where it actually switched off its transponders and came dangerously close to an American destroyer and also to an aircraft in the Baltic Sea area. Russia is deliberately flouting some of those protocols. I think with U.S. and China, we can actually work out how to handle these things.
Will we? I mean, Professor Xu here in Beijing, coming from the military side, I'm sure China has certain protocols as well, just as Ambassador Volker mentioned. But at times when the two planes, let's just take an example, could be so close to one another, sometimes your intention does not necessarily really reflect in the actual action or realities out there. It could be influenced by so many different factors, even including the mood of those in command itself. So what do you make of those technical details? Are they really likely to solve the problem?
Okay, I'm really appreciate that your American friends know so much detail about the tactical measures they used to take or they practiced in the past. But I have to say that tactical measures can only resolve tactical issues. The U.S.-China relation is a strategic issue, and this tactical, practice of the United States of America, that sending their military aircraft and their vessels into the coastal area of China, really send a very bad signal to the Chinese people. I mean, the whole public perceive this as a very hostile, intentions and practices that will create, mistrust, and it's really is one of the major obstacles for further, improve our relations.
All right.
We have large rooms for cooperation in maintaining regional peace, provide public goods, but just due to this kind of hostility, it's hard for decision makers in the central government to make
Mr. Tang, remind me if you can, because I'm sure you know much better than I am about the EP3 incident happened over the Hainan Island between China and the United States that really put the bilateral relations to one of the lowest points over the past few decades since the two countries established diplomatic ties. But of course, we came out of that crisis after both sides making a lot of effort, but that was regarded as an accident by the U.S. side. That was regarded by with clear intention from the Chinese side. So still, we do not have same views about this specific incident. Having said that, though, can that be a lesson for both sides? What kind of mechanisms, under the current circumstances, you heard very clearly from Ambassador Volker, that's not likely to change from the U.S. side. You know, under the circumstances, what really can be done?
We should learn lessons from the history, especially the clash between the two militaries. For example, the Chinese fighter was lost, and the Chinese pilot who also lost his life during the clash. And actually, in recent years, the two countries have tried the best to avoid such an accidental event. For example, we have already reached at least 2 MOUs in terms of the air encountering and also the maritime encountering. This is actually a very good practice for the two countries. For example, when there is encountering over the high sea and all the common channel, between the two militaries opened to communicate, I think quite well. So this is a good practice, but everybody knows the aircraft in such a high speed, and any accidental behavior, action will cause
even minor.
The life or even the loss of the aircraft. So this is a really dangerous game. In terms of the response of China, I'm sure China will increase its defensive activities, especially to intercept all these surveillance aircraft very close to the Chinese territory.
Right. Well, Ambassador Volker, there are a series of events that China, and it seems that people here take into note. One, of course, is the so-called international arbitration against China concerning the sovereignty of some of the islands China claims in the South China Sea. That is still going on between China and the Philippines. The U.S., some say, has been playing a role behind the scenes. Other thing, for example, recently, the missile-guided destroyer of the United States near the Chinese territory, and there has been some very different views coming from China as well toward the U.S. action. And then we got the U.S. planes over the area of South China Sea. China also claims, and then the Chinese jets tried to intercept, and all of these, the interactions among the two sides, which put really into the question as to what is the U.S. intention, and is it going to be an escalation of these intentions until a political result that none of us want to see, being the two powerful nations, as some say, of the world. Ambassador Volker.
Sure, thank you. First off, I think there's 3 principles to mention. One, the U.S. doesn't take a view on the dispute between China, Vietnam, Philippines on sovereignty over issues. We recognize that there is a dispute and we don't take a position on it. That means that we do not favor, second principle, we do not favor unilateral action by any actor, whether it's Vietnam or China, to assert military dominance or control in this area because we see it as a dispute. And the third principle is what was mentioned, freedom of navigation. It's a hundreds of years old principle that in international waters, navies have the ability to access those waters, use that space, and we believe upholding that principle. So what is the U.S. intention? The U.S. intention is to live with those principles and to see that stability and peace are maintained, as has been the case ever since the end of World War II. We're looking at 60 years of peace in this respect. Nothing should change now.
All right. We talk about peace, but we also talk about the current challenges. I would like to hear quote the Chinese ambassador to the United States, who has been very vocal, of course, during his term in the U.S., Mr. Cui Tiankai. Ambassador Cui recently described the current U.S.-China relationship as being, quote, another defining moment, end of quote. Ambassador Cui said that whether the two sides can make the right choices depends on 3 key factors, as he sees it: their visions of the world today, their perceptions of each other, and their will and skills to manage differences while enhancing cooperation. Earlier, of course, the 3 gentlemen here mentioned a lot about the skills, technical skills to manage the differences. But eventually, what are we looking at when China, in a way, is begin to rise and U.S. is the incumbent power? How those technical details, strategic visions, and also realities be handled? I want to hear from both of you very briefly, if you can. Professor Xu.
I want to repeat again, tactical, matters can only resolve tactical, problems. But those tactical problems really have a strategic implication. So the strategic vision of the two sides is very important. We try to define the relationship, but up to now there's no clear and definite definition of this relationship. Although we passed over several rounds of crossroads, I do hope that we can. Experienced with such a kind of ups and downs, it's time for China and U.S. to define the relationship for building the new major power relations.
Can we define?
Yeah, I'm sure. I quite agree with what Ambassador mentioned just now. We are defining the relationship between China and the United States. For example, in security, economy. Actually, the competition between the two sides in these two areas has been intensified. And actually, the standoff in the South China Sea is very significant, part of the defining of our relations in this regard.
Interesting. Ambassador Volker, final words from you.
Thank you, and compliments to Ambassador Cui. He's an excellent diplomat here in Washington. And I think what he uses the word defining moment. That can be seen negatively, but it can also be seen positively.
Right.
Because as some of your other guests said, we do have different strategic visions, but they are not necessarily incompatible visions. With a growing China and with a strong United States, we have a lot of shared interests. We have some shared values, some differences. And I think if we work together, we can grow together. And I think there's a possibility of this being a defining moment in a very positive sense as well.
All right. We hope many in both capitals are really on the same line with the three of you. Thank you so much. Ambassador Kurt Volker from the United States, Professor Xu Hui, and also Dr. Teng Jianjun. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for being with us. Thank you. Really appreciate it. Stay with us here on World Insight. We got our final segment coming right up. The whole world in his hands. Nigerian Babatunde Ostemene, head of the United Nations Population Fund, speaks about improving reproductive health in Africa. We also discuss the challenges facing China as it deals with the biggest population in the world. Welcome back. You're watching World Insight on CCTV News. The newly found and rescued schoolgirls of Nigeria have occupied the global headlines in recent days. Over 200 Chibok schoolgirls were kidnapped by the extremist group Boko Haram more than 2 years ago. The return of these two girls have reignited hope for the parents of Chibok girls of the return of their kidnapped children. One man, a native of Nigeria, cares about young children and women in particular. He is Babatunde Osotime, who was appointed in 2010 as the new executive director of UNFPA, the United Nations Population Fund. He was reappointed to this position in 2014. I sat down with him when he was in Beijing recently, talking about the girls' education problem. Before we get to that, let's take a look at the situation today.
Only 10 years old, Fatima Muhammad is used to backbreaking work every day. It's her job to bring water for her family, then cook and wash. Yusera Burhan is 12 years old. She is among the lucky few girls in Somalia who are able to go to school.
I want to give this message to the fathers to let their children, to let their girls to be studied and to be best from the boys.
Despite global progress in recent years, girls continue to suffer severe disadvantage and exclusion in educational systems throughout their lives. According to UNESCO, 35 million girls are out of school around the world. For adolescent girls, lots of hurdles stand in their way of getting an education.
Adolescent girls especially face a lot of barriers from the research we've done in terms of financial barriers to get to school, stay in school, but also traditional and cultural beliefs in terms of education, the benefits of it for girls.
Girls' education is a critical lever in reaching other development objectives. Providing girls with an education helps break the cycle of poverty. Educated women are less likely to marry early and against their will, less likely to die in childbirth, more likely to have healthy babies, and are more likely to send their children to school. Adolescent girls that attend school delay marriage and childbearing, are less vulnerable to disease, including HIV and AIDS, and acquire information and skills that lead to increased earning power. The call for girls' rights to education won't stop until all have access to a quality education and to develop her potential.
Join me now in the Beijing studio is Dr. Babatunde Oshotime, who is the United Nations Under Secretary General and also the Executive Director of UNFPA, the United Nations Population Fund. Welcome to our program, Doctor.
Thank you very much.
Great to have you, because I know you have very busy schedule here in China when visiting this country. And by the way, you have very busy schedule dealing with all the young people from all over the world.
1.8 billion of them. So
you are supporting them in the cause of HIV/AIDS. But this could be very difficult if they are not being mobilized on their own. How are you going to do it?
Well, let me start, because I think we have to take it in the whole construct.
Let's do that.
Of empowering them. So we at UNFPA, we believe that the world will be a better place if we can educate, empower and employ the 1.8 billion young people in the world. We will change the entire world, because they will transform economies, they will transform the social system.
Yes.
They will be agents of change wherever they
Okay,
are.
this is important, but how to do it?
Okay.
I mean, culturally different. There are a lot of different cultures. Developing country, developed economies, not to mention, political systems. Go ahead.
Totally. Because, and I'm going to disaggregate it and talk about the young adolescent girl, because I think she's the most important in this circumstance.
Okay.
And so, in a sense, and you refer to culture, and you refer to restrictions within society that actually affect young people. It affects the young adolescent girl more than any other demographic. So what we at UNFPA do is to work on the ground with communities and governments to ensure that girls go to school, they are not married off early, they are not traumatized with female genital mutilation, for an example, and because they are at school and all of that, they are not exposed to HIV and sexually transmitted infections. And they also taught comprehensive sexuality education, which is important for them to know about themselves and about how diseases like HIV is transmitted.
I think culturally it is very important and also sensible to make sure the messages could get across, the right messages, first of all, and secondly, get across in the most efficient way.
What we do,
how are you going to do that? Tell me about some of the girls that you have been helping with.
Okay, let me tell you, when we go into a society or a community, we work not only with the girls, but we work with the entire community. So the gatekeepers in that community, the elders, the religious leaders, the women, elderly women there, the mothers, the sisters, everybody's involved. So because it is only that way that you can sustain it. We're not going to be there forever, but if we can get everybody to understand that this is the way to go and they accept it, that's it. And I'll tell you a story, and it's a very good story. When I was doing HIV in Nigeria, was leading the HIV response in Nigeria, what we did was to do comprehensive sexuality education. And I went to a secondary school. When I got there, some of the girls came to me and told me that, after we have been taught all of it about comprehensive sexuality education, and we now know how HIV is transmitted, they had decided they were going to form abstinence club, an abstinence club, which meant that they understood, they internalized it, and they are protecting themselves by abstaining. That's good. But I also told them that, if for any reason you want to step out of the abstinence club, please make sure you protect yourself and you protect your partner. So I think it's a matter of the methodology of entry into community.
Right.
It is also respecting the structures in that community and making sure that you can work with it.
Well, it sounds easy, but it's not. You did. You understand this much better than I do. When you say you're influencing the parents, you're influencing the sisters, you're influencing the classmates, it's all easier said than done. For example, when you look at some of the most popular publications or books, let's just say coming from Africa, there's still one that I could remember, a book called A Desert Flower, talking about one young girl coming from Africa moving to the United States to become one of the world's top models. She recounted her days in Africa, some of the traditional ways of dealing with women as they grow up are certainly not accepted by the rest of the world. So that is a tradition. And that is not necessarily going to be supportive to your cause. So how are you going to change that tradition?
Yeah, but you know, there are traditions and cultures everywhere.
Yes, indeed, but you have to change it.
And so, in a sense, what you need to do, and what I've just described to you, is a simplified form of what we do. You know, when you go into a community or into a society, the message you must send to them is that you are not there, you know, like all-knowing. You know that they have traditions, they have their culture. All you are there to do is to add value to what they're doing. And if you do it, and you are not in a hurry, you have to be persistent, you have to understand what are their issues, you have to also let them accept you into their society before you can change them. And we succeeded.
Time though is not on your side.
Yeah, but
because we're talking about HIV/AIDS and prevention, and every minute we are talking about something significant to the life. So you are not having 1 billion people working for you all over the world.
Yeah, but you understand that when we do this, we're not doing it all by ourselves. We also have champions in society, in communities that we train to take it forward.
But can you really change traditions?
Especially
those traditions that are really going against your cause. What can you do with it?
Yeah, but let me tell you, and I would give examples. For female genital mutilation, for instance, we have been able to change, you know, 150,000 communities around the world to abandon it. Huge. So it is not impossible. When I was doing HIV in Nigeria, only 5 to 10% of Nigeria believed there was HIV when we started. By the time we finished, we had almost 100% believing there was. So, in a sense, it's about systematically doing it. And I can tell you, we use various things. Apart from us working in communities, we also use theater, local theater. We use communication in languages that you understand. We use barber shops. We use all kinds of things to get the conversation going.
What if the father is telling you, if my daughter is not going through this operation, she cannot marry a man? And that is a traditional belief in many of the communities.
But we know that. But I tell you what happened in Sudan, young men now formed a society to say, we are not going to marry women who have been caught. And that we don't believe this is right. And the young men were now the ones who are trying to change society. Young Sudanese men who believed that this should not happen. So in a sense, there are many ways.
Are you talking about sporadic cases, or
no,
are you talking about the overall systematic change?
Systematic change, and this is what it is. This is what it is, and I can tell you, yes, of course, you know, when a tradition has been there for a long time, it's not overnight that we change it. We understand that. We also understand that it is not just by going in for one day and coming out, but it's about systematically engaging and making sure that at every point you can actually say things are happening, and working with different stakeholder groups in order for it to happen.
What was that realization moment for you, Dr. Oshatame? For example, when you were working in Nigeria, that realization time that things really has changed. What was that time like for you?
It is the point at which, independently, I send people into communities to go and find out what's going on. And they bring out stories and statistics to show me that actually things are moving there. And then I'm happy. But I'm never satisfied until everybody accepts what we're doing. Because, yes, of course, there's tradition. Yes, of course, there's culture. But, you know, there's no culture that would accept that their girls can die. There's no culture that accepts that their boys can die. Once you make them understand where things are, they tend to fall in.
At times, people would say, yes, what you said are right, but don't come and preach us about what we should do.
That is the difference. We don't preach. We try to tell you exactly. The point about it, and I say this with all sense of respect to people, that communities around the world, they've had traditions and cultures for thousands of years. Traditions which they communicate with, traditions which they heal with, traditions which they educate with. They're there. They've been there before. So we are not coming to now give them anything which they don't have already. All you are trying to do is to make sure that the new knowledge you are bringing adds value to what they are saying. And using their own communication system, using their own education system, you can actually change many of the things they're doing.
The other thing, of course, is a change of population worldwide. You've seen also in developing economies such as China, the proportion of population has been evolving so quickly. Many years ago, 20 years ago, shall we say, at the very beginning of China's opening up and reform, people are talking about the labor surplus this country has. It's a key factor contributing to the overall success of a reform and opening up for the export industry. But now things have changed so much in terms of the age groups in this country. What do you make of all of these changes going on in emerging and developing countries?
Now, let me go back, because I think it's important for us to put this into a conceptual framework. Today, there are 1.8 billion young people in the world, and most of them are in the developing world. And if really we want the developing world to grow and to be sustainable, we need to do new investments in young people, in their education, entrepreneurship training, comprehensive sexuality education, exposing them to good health, good nutrition, and family planning and contraception, and then creating jobs for them in an environment of good governance. That's what we at UNFPA are working with governments in Africa to do. We're actually working with about 18 countries now to help them put this together, and we believe that if we sustain that, they will reach that demographic dividend that enables them to have young people who would have employment, who would be able to earn, who will be able to save and grow economies. And I think that's what China has done, and that is what China is benefiting from. But I also understand what you're saying, that, when you now look at what is happening in the dynamics of China, where in point of fact, you now have an aging population, and that after some time, you might not have the vibrancy and the dynamism of young people to drive the economy. I don't think we should look at it in terms of aging as a major problem, because today I can tell you that 70 is the new 40. You see 70-year-olds being very active.
Are you being self-comforting in a way? Because
No, I'm
you're
not.
just saying, well, we have to face this reality.
No, I'm not. I've seen 70-year-olds who are still very aggressive and active at work. I'll use myself. I'm 67.
Right.
And I'm working.
But what do you make of these worldwide demographic change? What would that mean for our economy in the future?
Let me land, because I think that what I think we need to do is to come to the reality of that new demographic in China. If people are aging, what we need to do is to make sure that we have a social protection floor that provides for their health, for their welfare, and making sure that they're healthy and they can continue to be productive. If they're so, then we also need to begin to revise our concept of retirement, of pensions and all of that, because, what we've done is arbitrarily say people retire at 55, at 60, but actually some of them are still very active. So why don't they continue to work and produce and be part of the economy?
Well, we hope that will be the solution. And we hope that many of the creative solutions will come out.
That will probably be part of the solution, because when they are there, they can mentor young people they can actually train young people, they can actually contribute extensively intellectually to growth.
Right.
We've seen university professors who have been at work, you know, up until they're 80 and they have not retired. And you see in the United States, you don't retire as a Supreme Court judge until you die. So in
well,
a sense,
that is an extreme example, I'm afraid, Dr. Osho-Teme.
But that is what I'm saying.
But I really appreciate your optimism. For now, we have to say goodbye. Dr. Babatude Osho-Teme, it's such a pleasure, sir, to have you.
Thank you very much.
All the best to your cause. Babatude Osho-Teme from UNFPA. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of a program, visit our website. Just type in World Insight, CCTV News into your search engine. You'll be able to find us. Or you can also check out our YouTube channel. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone at the World Insight team, thanks for watching. And tune in again next week for more insights from across China and around the world. Good night and have a great weekend.